you're here. My name's Norma Jean Belenke. I am the head of events here at Podbean. And I'm going to read our brief intro and then we will jump in and get started. So here we go. Welcome back, everyone, to Podcasting Smarter and our October live panel event, How to Become a Podcast Editor, using your indie podcast skills for freelance, remote work, or to create a business. In collaboration with Stephanie Fuccio of Podcast Editing Plus and Global Podcast Editors and Geopats for this truly global conversation. With special guests Puneeth Shenoy from India, David Romer from Mexico, and hopefully Feifei from Nigeria. It's live, so you never know. We've had some technical issues, but they will discuss the nuances of podcast editing, freelancing, and going pro. For those of you who may be joining us for the first time, Podcasting Smarter has live stream sessions just like this one with top podcasters and podcasting experts. We also have exclusive recorded episodes on the Podcasting Smarter podcast, and we are brought to you by Podbean. We're a podcast hosting and monetizing platform and home to over 620,000 podcasts. To start your podcast, head over to podbean.com today. And here we go. Let's get started. Hello, everybody.
Yay. Hello.
It's so nice to connect with you. So, as we jump in, I want to just have a brief intro with each of you. And I'd love to hear about what you currently do within podcast editing. And then I also want to hear kind of how you got into podcasting because everybody's journey in podcasting is different, right? So, David, let's start with you. I can't hear you, David.
Muted.
You're a little bit muted. Yep.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yes, we've got you. Okay. This is the great
Sorry.
thing about live. Let's hear it, David.
So I started in podcasting. I mean, long story short, because I love podcasts. So I think this is a medium where a lot of people arrive because they love it. And I started listening to a lot of narrative podcasts in English when I was in college here in Mexico. And I was always tempted to do the same thing in Spanish. I was like, there needs to be something like This American Life, NPR in Spanish. And like that's where Genuina Media, which is the company I started, that's what inspired it, right? So we do original podcast in Mexico, everything in Spanish, and we also have this creator network where we connect podcasters or creators with the world of audio.
Amazing. Steph, let's go with you next.
Right. Yeah. Gosh, I wear a bunch of hats in podcasting, and I have a fan blowing at me. So if I keep doing this, it's because it's stinking hot where I am in Spain. Okay, so I wear a lot of hats. My biggest hat right now is probably podcast editing, and that's got 2 sub hats. Oh God, that's got 2 sides. I edit podcasts for clients, and I also do some consulting work. And then I have the community aspect for Global Podcast Editors, where we have twice a month live chat similar to this, but not as themed. Over on YouTube, we do that twice a month, and there's also a newsletter that comes out a few times, 6 times a month now. Yeah, and different aspects and events and different things that we do to try to reduce the isolation of podcast editing. So I've got those, and I also have a passion project podcast, and I write about podcasting, and I think those are the main hats.
That's a lot.
That's a lot of hats.
And we'll get back to that. We're so excited to collaborate with you for today's event. And then Puneeth, let's hear about your podcast editing and podcasting journey.
I am the editor/engineer for some of the top popular names in the podcasting space, like Hala Taha, who hosts the Young and Profiting podcast, Jason Waller, who hosts the True Underdog podcast, Alison Maslin from The Skate Method, and some of the shows of Blinkist like Jordan Harbinger, Tiffany Bova, etc. I've been in this space for around 2 years now, and recently in the month of March, I started my own production house, Podcast Pundits. So we have been working on that for almost 4 months now, I guess, 4 or 5 months. And the way I got into podcast editing or podcast engineering was quite literally a very sudden and a very kind of like a hasty decision, but a decision that I liked. It was after watching an episode of Joe Rogan. I mean, as cliche as that might sound, and the episode was where Nawal Ravikant, one of my biggest idols, was the host, and that was literally the first ever podcast episode that I watched full, like from the beginning till the end. And when I was watching that, towards the end, I realized that I mean, I am an SA certified audio engineer. I seem to like podcasting. I have the relevant skills, so why not get into it? And once I got into it, I started loving it more and more, and now here I am.
Amazing. I love that.
Love
You know,
it.
I think everybody starts somewhere within podcasting, and it's so great to hear. I think we have Fei here as well, but
Yay.
because of bandwidth, we may not have video. Fei, are you here with us? Hi. Okay. Can you hear us? Because we can't. I'm not picking up audio. Is it? Are you? Can you? Okay, maybe you might have to. I've added Fei to the stream here. Okay. Can you
Does
hear
it bring
us,
up a
Fei?
box if it's even just audio?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not seeing. Okay, we
She
can't.
said
You
she
can't
couldn't
hear
anything.
anything. Okay, Fei. I'm gonna. Why don't you leave and then come back, and then we'll try and re-add you to the stream as we continue our conversation. So, I want to direct this next question to you, Steph, because
Yes.
you know, you wear so many hats in the podcast editing space. And what's great about podcasting is that we're kind of in this Wild West moment, right? Where everybody
Yes.
there's room for everyone. Everyone can find a career or a freelance gig or a creative outlet in podcasting, which is pretty exciting. And podcast editing is really a career or a freelance gig or a side hustle that's taking off for a lot of people. So
Mhm.
just for everybody out there, I know this is kind of a preliminary question, but can you just break down for us, what is a podcast editor?
Oh gosh.
No pressure.
I think the biggest thing to talk about first is where that podcast editor is going to live in podcast land. Are they going to be like an independent podcast editor that works with like maybe in like small businesses or small content creators and do that kind of like that kind of thing, or they working for like bigger networks, so that like the NPRs and the PRXs, those kinds of things, because those are two very different spaces for podcast editors to maneuver. So that's the first thing. But basically, in its simplest essence, podcast editors are primarily dealing with the audio of the podcast. And that does include the speaking parts. It can include sound design, although that seeps over into audio engineering sometimes. And it can include a few other things, but primarily it's the sound of the episodes.
Absolutely. And it's editing, you know, or clipping those episodes down or getting, you know, the smoothest sound, whether it's within a flow of an interview or, you know, within the technical audio of it. And I believe we have Fei here with us. Fei, can you hear us?
Yeah, I can. Hi.
Hello, and
Yay.
welcome. So we're so excited. We have Fei here, audio only. Fei is live with us here from Nigeria, and she is the she's with 808 Extra and Niger Pod Hub, which is fantastic. It's a Nigerian podcasting organization. So, Fei, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into podcast editing and the work that you do as well.
Okay, having me. My name is Fei. I am the founder of 808 Extra, an audio production company at Niger Pod Hub, the Nigerian podcast community. I started first interned on radio in 2012, and I was in the production department. Love for everything that was happening there, and that evolved into podcasting 2017, where I randomly stumbled on a podcast. I just couldn't stop myself from listening. So the more I listened, the more interesting things I create, things of my own with the experience that I had gained from radio in 2019, and just went straight into podcasting. And it was a bold move because even at the time here in Nigeria, there weren't many podcasts, but the time would come where there'll be a lot of podcasts and there has to be someone who would point where, they should be going. So started my company community from about 2017. That's when I started building, and from there it's just been one thing after another. Getting to meet the good people at AfriPod, Africa, and getting to work with some people at Google and the BBC, and basically just with podcasting. When it comes to production, I am more into editing as well is my love, because I love to back and forth, re-record and all that good stuff. So that's a rough summary casting so far, and I hope you enjoyed it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's so fascinating, how everybody gets into podcasting differently. And with a radio background, I think you're the only one here on today's panel with a radio background, and just having that foresight to take a risk. Like, hey, I love podcasting. This hasn't, in 2017, this hasn't maybe hit the mainstream as much as it has today in 2022. I'm going to start this production company and jump into it. And I think what you said is really interesting, as editing being your first love, but then also production being a really big aspect of it. Because there is that, people who edit love editing, right? It's taking that tape, whether you have that raw material and crafting something out of it that is more clear or has, a more succinct message or is more in line or aligned with maybe what the podcast is trying to say. So I think that, having that love of editing probably helps you produce as well. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's absolutely correct.
Yeah, cool. So I wanna move forward a little bit because we talked a little bit about what is a podcast editor, and so Feifei, I want to pose that question to you, and then we'll also ask David as well. So because I think that that the nuances of being a podcast editor are different for everyone, right? Everybody thinks, okay, you cut paste and then you have an episode, but there is a creative arc and there is kind of an artistic, maybe an artistic aspect of it that I'd love to hear the three of you speak to as well. Feifei?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, so a podcast editor, or let's say an audio editor, but someone, first of all, who never gets tired of listening to audio. That is one key thing. Because with the job comes hours and hours, and if you don't, first of all, love listening, you have a big problem. So, another hand is someone who has great editorial judgment, great story picking ears, or something like that. And what that means is basically when you're listening to an audio file, it means that you're able to identify interesting would get a listener hooked, right? Because sometimes you have hosting files 2 to 3 hours. There's stuff in there that can be used, should be used. So being able to identify those interesting points, piecing knowing the right narrative to add to it, after your editing are the best qualities or features that helps you identify a good podcast editor.
Oh, that's such a beautiful answer. I love it. You said you have to love listening.
Exactly.
And yeah, and I think that's true. And I think also, like Puneet, you also touched on this. David, we'll come to you last because Puneet, you also kind of touched on this about like you saw your first podcast episode and then you were just hooked. I think we all are kind of like bitten by this podcasting bug, where you find something you love and then you think, okay, and you kind of really go deep on it. So Puneet, I'd love to hear from you as well about the nuances of editing for you.
I mean, the biggest mindset that I go into editing is like, if I'm listening to this episode, like if I'm the audience, if I'm the listener,
Yeah.
how would I enjoy it?
Mm.
I mean, would I like the pacing of it? Would I like this particular sentence or this particular topic to be in there? I mean, if let's say that if the guest, goes on a tangent speaking about something, and that happens quite a lot of times, would the listener actually get any value from listening to this tangential topic? And um, I would say the biggest thing that and what makes an editor a good editor is that maintaining the human touch. I mean, not just mechanically or robotically, just removing ums, ahs, not just cutting all sorts of gaps into like 1 second, 0.5 seconds. I mean, if a particular sentence requires more pause, like let's say it's a dramatic sentence, or if it's a thoughtful sentence, and it does require a long pause, and it doesn't make to remove that pause and cut it short to like 1 second, something like that. So maintaining that human touch, maintaining that narrative interest, that is what makes an audio editor an audio editor. That's my perspective on it.
Oh, I love that. David, I kind of also moved you last on this question because you also edit podcasts in Spanish. So I want to hear your take on, the nuances of being a podcast editor, but also, you know, within utilizing a different language, does that also change how you edit?
Wow. I don't think I've ever asked myself that question,
Oh.
but it's a good question. I mean, I think I agree with what Feifei and Punit have said. Um, I think you need to love listening. At the end of the day, there are basically no shortcuts. You can learn to copy and paste and to cut really fast, and the shortcuts of whatever interface you're using, but you need to have a lot of patience when you edit. And I think that's amazing because you need to get like there really, you need to get really like the depth of the audio, right? And I think something important in Spanish that I've noticed a lot in Spanish is that people here are afraid of cutting down. Like they leave everything, and I think part of being an audio editor is realizing that whatever the guest or the host is saying is boring. Sometimes it had like everybody says boring stuff and you need to cut it down. And I think the beauty of being a podcast editor is to make an audio that seems simple, but like that behind it there's so much work, but
Mhm.
that feels simple. And I think it's really hard to achieve. And regarding Spanish, I think it's such a different language from English. We're so limited by so many different things, and I don't know, like I hope I can explain this, but we're still getting to a point where listening to podcasting Spanish still feels like way too formal. We haven't been like
Mhm.
it's kind of weird to explain, but
You haven't
in English,
broken that fourth wall, maybe, is what it sounds like in terms of,
exactly.
me and the mic, casual, hey, everybody, how's it going?
Yeah, sometimes it feels like
Mhm.
somebody's still telling you an advertisement, or
Yeah.
and I think it's part of getting used to it, and it's part also to change people's tone. But it's interesting
Mhm.
because English has more vocabulary, it has more concepts, and Spanish is kind of limited in that sense. But where it's getting there, though, it's getting there.
Oh, that's so interesting to hear about. And I love that, each of you has all of this different experience and nuance in terms of editing because it is so different. It is so personal, right? And there are universal aspects of it as well. Oh, we have Feifei here. Hi, Feifei.
Yay!
You made it. But it's one of those things I think where also, whether it's the language or the fact that everybody says boring things. That's true,
So true.
and it's not bad.
No, but like when I first started podcasting, I felt like if I took that out of my own podcast, that the guest would notice and they'd be offended that I didn't savor every word. And I quickly learned that that's not true. They don't remember a thing that happened. As long as you make them sound good, that's what's important. You make them sound good. You make them sound like you bring out the things that they said that are really important and you get rid of the rest because you don't want to waste people's time.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's also about getting that message across succinctly.
Mhm.
I mean, I think all of you, that was a real commonality of what you each said, you know, about
Mhm.
kind of taking that raw material and loving to listen to it, right?
Mhm.
Loving listening to it, and then, you know, and then making something better out of it, which is really fun. Or just using those creative juices to kind of, you know, move things around and create something exciting. I kind of want to ask you all, you know, it seems to be there's this tipping point, right? This critical kind of moment for podcasters where, you know, maybe you edit your own podcast. You're starting out, maybe I mean, Feifei, in your case, you came from radio. Um, Puneeth, you said you have an audio editing background, but a lot of podcasters are self-taught. A lot of them do have more traditional backgrounds, but that are adjacent. They're not directly, you know, podcasting related because it's such a new medium. And so I think a lot of people question themselves, right, about when does my skill, you know, as an editor or to piece things together beautifully or to pull out extraneous things or to add dramatic pauses, you know, when does that start to be a marketable skill? You know, when do other people want to pay for it? Right. So, and that's, you know, really why we're here today to kind of talk about this. So I want to pose this, Steph, to you first, you know, really speaking about this because there is that tipping point, I think, for a lot of podcasters,
Mhm.
and everybody does have their own unique journey, but also I think there is maybe a benchmark or a threshold. So I'd love to hear your journey, and then we can kind of go around and hear where everybody thinks that line is, maybe for them, and then also maybe, you know, as the industry evolves.
Sure, sure. I guess a disclaimer is due. I'm very much so a content first and sound cleanup second kind of person, meaning that even with my own podcast at first, I was like, I wanted to get content out and out and out, and I wanted to get that not so much just for consistency because you're supposed to, but I had a lot I needed to say. So I just was pushing content first. And then I learned the other things later as I went. And actually, it was for me, it was 3 years into my podcasting that people started to approach me because I had left my full time job and I was searching for something else, and they knew I was available and they knew that I edited my own podcast. And although I didn't say, oh, I'm looking for editing clients, people started to approach me at the beginning of the pandemic when everybody wanted to start a podcast, and they're like, hey, do you know someone? And I'm like, me, pick me. And so that's when I started to. And so it was 3 years in, but I was doing like this much compared to now in my own podcast. Like I've learned a ton since then because I'm more careful with my client stuff than I am with my own. So I don't know if I have an answer, but I think a few months in, at least I'd say 20, 30, maybe 40 episodes, depending on how long they are. I think you need to get into a rhythm and be comfortable with it and start to notice those nuances. And then, as long as you're clear with your clients what you can offer, what your skill level is, and that you're going to be growing and learning with them as their podcast is getting better, as long as you're transparent with them on what you can do, I think you can start pretty early as an editor for clients.
Absolutely. And I love what you said about being content focused more because, you know, there's lots of different styles of editing, right? As, you know, we're talking, there's so many different, it's like, you know, how many different kinds of podcasts are there? Well, 3 million, literally. But, you know, it's one of those things where there's everything from interview shows to it's me and the mic shows to narrative, you know, audio documentaries, right? So, Feifei, let's hear from you a little bit on that as well, because you have a radio background. So, you know, where was that tipping point for you? Because you kind of came from the opposite side, right? Of, you know, instead of, you know, having your own podcast and then branching out into a more professional space, you came from, you know, a more professional space to something that was a little bit, you know, more up and coming in terms of podcasting versus radio, which has had, you know, 100 years of lineage, in as professional audio.
So, I think for me, I kind of saw it, again, because of my background. I was on radio production. I was very clear about with my boss that I didn't want to be the coffee intern. So I really wanted to learn everything that I had to do and all of that. Initially, I started with doing voiceover. If it's just me, but I don't really like it. I'd rather edit your voice. At that point, I started realizing that a few commercial radio sometimes one thing outside of, remember, I attended a colleague, and they reach out. They say, oh, could you do, looks like I do. That's how skills are there. Orders, microphone, figuring out how to, so, I mean, from then I knew that record scripts and make money. That, that, that's the point of podcast. The first thing I said was a podcast network with no money and no idea how I was going to. I first started with my encourage people out for pod, and one of the people I encouraged podcast of somebody else who was for that person that
Yeah, Feifei, I'm just gonna. Sorry, you're not coming in very well. So, if you could just pop your video off, it may be something where everybody out there can hear you, but we're just having trouble maybe with the connection.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, maybe if you can just pop your video off. Sorry, please continue with what you were saying because it was really interesting.
Okay. So, I mean, I was saying at that time that the person came to me and talked about, okay, I want to invest, how can you help? How much is this gonna cost? So I had to go into figure out what the rates are, so I don't like get paid. I mean, I still got even go into that, but that was kind of the point where a person is coming. There's gonna be another. So what's gonna be the structure of this clients about these things when they approach me for either an idea on how to approach me with their audio and say, look, I've recorded this, help me build something like that. So that was the tipping point for me. Once people started coming, I knew the guys here. I just had to figure it out.
I've got a question. So Feifei, how did you price that first client? How did you come up with a number to charge them? Because that's always a really big thing, really difficult thing.
That was going to be my next question. Let's hear it, Feifei.
Okay, so just to look online and see if there are companies that offer video editing services. And at the time, there wasn't really much to find, and the sites that I could find at that time were charging in naira over here, and the naira to the dollar is about the naira is 600 times what the dollar should be.
Wow.
Yes. So so at the time it was really crazy because to go to my client and say, I'm going to charge you about 100, you convert it for, I don't know, let's say an hour. I didn't have the nerve to do that, so I had to cut it way down, and why I didn't do that is because that was my first paying client, and I really didn't know full because the only podcast I'd ever dealt with at that point was the podcast I encouraged people to start. A fair idea of what I was doing with that. You know, I wasn't really pressed for time. You know, I could tell them, look, I don't have time this week. We'll do it next week, and they'll be fine.
Right. It was a more casual relationship. Okay.
Exactly. Yeah. With the clients, I had to be more accountable and for when things were gonna get done, and I was still kind of, you know, quitting my job at that time, so I still had my 9 to 5 to worry about. You know, so okay,
Right.
people charge. I mean, the prices were not. There's this platform called Fiverr and Upwork, and the
Yep.
prices there this is too low, and then this is
Yes.
too high. So where is this price point? I started somewhere around, let's say, $20 per episode, editing for $20 an episode. In fact, it wasn't just editing, it was editing the podcast, you know, all of that for that
Wow.
price. You know, and I just sit and I'm so mad at the client for having so many repetitions yourself and you're paying me so little, but it's not their fault.
Yeah.
You know, really hard work. And then, you know, at the time as well, I didn't have a skill in audio production and audio processing. Complaints like, no, this doesn't sound right. The raw file I gave you sounds better than what you've given it. You need to change it. So all of that, I figured, okay, there's so much more to learn here. Learn a lot more with the processing, the editing, you know, like what said it here, something about not making it sound so mechanical, something about leaving that human in there, you know. Sometimes I would over edit and they'd be like, no, this doesn't sound robotic, and then I have to go back and start undoing all the changes I made. And from there though, from that price point, as time went on, I started to figure, okay, you know, compared to the amount of time and energy I put into this researching, okay, how do I create a proper rate card? You need words make a minute. You know, what do I categorize or a 1 hour file? What are the seconds I allow when I say hour file? Does it get to 1 hour 15? Okay, if I'm charging this for 15 minutes or 30 minutes of audio, just so there is a template, because another thing I hate negotiating with a client. Like, I don't have that time. I have files to go edit. So the fine print of all of that, you know, and it still changes. You meet some clients who can pay you what you're worth, and the ones who just can't afford it. So you have to like adjust that price point for them as well.
Yeah, absolutely. David, let's hear from you next about this.
Yeah, of course. So I studied law in Mexico. I have basically no background in audio. I I like learn by myself what I know, and I can't say at all I'm an expert. I can, especially like in the audio engineer part, like learning all the time. And here I think there's this, I mean, in general, I think an audio editor should always charge. You know, I think it's a super marketable job. And right now that there's this podcasting boom, I mean, in Latin America, we're like 5 years behind the US, let's say. So the marketing boom is like really live right now, and everybody's looking for someone to edit their podcast. And I think prices are just being set. And after what Fefe said, I think there needs to be, like, people need to value what they're doing, right? Because there's this, I guess, this just like situation where a lot of the podcast editors in Latin America are people that started in music, and
Mhm.
they right now there's not a lot of good paying jobs in music, and they're turning to audio, to podcasting, and there there are no clear prices there. And I think they're starting to there's people that are starting to really commit to podcasting, and that's amazing
Mhm.
because first we had really amateur guys that moved from music to podcasting, and now we're looking at people that are becoming artists, that are
Mhm.
working at narrative podcasts. They are super focused on making the right sounds and the right music and creating original music, and it's super exciting. So I think there's a lot of levels of podcast editors. Everyone should charge, and I think there's a point where you're basically doing a lot of creative sound design and editing, and that should cost much more.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's something where, as the industry is evolving, everybody's going to come into it differently. So,
Mhm.
Feifei, like you were saying about getting your first clients, and then it's the first person that's trusting you with their audio, and then it's like, okay, what do I charge, right? So,
Exactly.
and there is that kind of, well, I'm not the $5 editing thing. My time is worth more than $5 an hour to sit there and, even just to pay for your equipment and the programs,
Mhm.
versus, or, I'm not, I don't have 20 years in an audio production studio kind of a thing. So there, I think it's interesting to see how everybody kind of comes across their rate and gets to that first number, and then how that number changes, with your clients,
Yes.
as you as you
Mhm.
purchase maybe even more editing software, as you incorporate, like, oh, hey, maybe I should also include the cost of my electricity, that kind of thing, because you are
And
operating a business. Yeah, Steph.
yeah, and we had a really big discussion on this in the Global Podcast Editors Google group last week, where somebody was asking not just like a number for how much should I charge, but what are the factors
Yeah,
to
what goes into the
consider?
number? Yeah.
Yeah, it's not just your time, it's the time it took you to learn it, it's your equipment, it's all of, if you're like, if it's freelancing or a small business, you've got business expenses that go beyond that. You could have like your vacation, your healthcare, like there's all of those entrepreneurial expenses that come in too. And then there's how many people are involved. If it's with a client that requires multiple meetings with multiple people, you have to charge more because that's more time and effort and organization and planning, and that's another factor. And there's just this long list of these factors that you don't know when you first start. Like for me, I was like, I want 25 an hour because I'm just doing this until I find a full-time job, and that was how I started. And I quickly realized that that was not even remotely enough, even for a half-hour interview. I was like, that's not even like, that's not okay. So yeah, there's a million factors.
Yeah, there's so many factors. So, Puneeth, last but not least, tell us a little bit about your journey in terms of, you talked about getting into podcasting, but to make it more of a career and then learning what to charge.
I mean, over the time, like initially, even I had no idea what to charge. I mean,
Yeah, it's a vacuum out
like
there. So, yeah.
literally no idea what to charge. But
Mhm.
initially, I did a couple of episodes for free just to, kind of build my portfolio and stuff like that, just to show when, like, if I approach a bigger podcast, just to show,
Mhm.
yeah, this is my work. So I had to have something. And um, over the time, I've kind of developed this kind of system that I follow when I'm approaching a new client and the new client asks me my rates. So what I basically do is I look at the type of show that the client has, and I look at the kind of similar shows in that particular category. Now, let's say it's like a business interview style podcast.
Mhm.
So I'll just Google or I just go on Spotify and I just search for business podcasts. I see some of the top podcasts there. I see if the quality of editing, the quality of production of those podcasts match to what I'm doing. If they do match, I go to the podcast website. I go to the team sections where I can find some of them. Some of the websites do have teams, some of them don't. But if they have a team, I
Mhm.
can just go to and find the person who is responsible for the production, or it can be a company or a single person, right? And if that company has a website, I go to their website, I check their prices, and then let's say on a rough scale it is 100, right? If it is 100, I go to my original client and I would undercut the 100 by let's say I'll charge 90. That's what I do.
Hmm.
I hope I was not very confusing.
No, that
No,
makes
that
a
was
lot of
very
sense. I mean,
methodical.
very methodical. And I think also market research plays into this a lot, right? Because when
Mhm.
you're
Yep.
looking at, some of the larger production companies, if you can produce on that scale, right, whether it's quality or volume,
Mhm.
um, and you're talking to clients who have similar podcasts or who want to be in those categories
Mm-hmm.
or of that kind of caliber of content, right? It's important to know what the going rate is. So I think doing that market
Mhm.
research is really important. And it's very specific, right? I would say it's also based on the niche of podcast, right? Is it an interview
Yep.
show? Is it,
Mhm.
is there a composer for that show? And it's,
Yeah.
like tens of thousands of dollars per episode, because some podcasts are like that, when you're dealing with some of the bigger
Mhm.
players. It's definitely something that it's important to factor out. And then trying to find those production houses, independent editors, and seeing,
Mhm.
if they post their rates. I think that's really important because it gives you an idea of, what the work is worth in the market
Mhm.
right now.
Yep.
And it gives you a bit of a benchmark. So I think it's so interesting to hear each of your takes on this, right? Starting out thinking, Faye and Steph, just starting out thinking like, hey, I'll take this client and, maybe it's 20 an episode or 25, and then later on, hey, what is my time worth? What did it cost to get this program? What is
Mhm.
the current rate in the market? And then, David, also on your aspect, audio editors from music coming in, right? And maybe
Mhm.
maybe they went to school for music and that cost a lot of money. Right? So the value of that education and learning, specific programs is also a factor as well. And Steph, I really love what you said about that list, of what goes into my pricing, right? Electricity, programs used, my actual time, how many meetings I
Mhm.
have to have with the client. I think these are all really important aspects that podcasters need to ask themselves when they're thinking about,
Mhm.
hey, do I want to offer editing as a service professionally? Um, and I think that that's a really important point. I want to pivot a little bit next and talk about what are some good benchmarks of a great editor. Because I know, Feifei, as you said earlier, you have to really like listening. You have to never be able to get sick of that. And I think that's such an important point. I want to get back to that. David, let's start with you on this one. What do you feel are some good benchmarks of being a great podcast editor?
Oh, that's a good question. I think a good podcast editor has to be someone that's really open to listen, not to your podcast, but like to your vision, to what you want. Because sometimes, as I think there's a really big barrier between what a client wants and what they transmit to the editor. It's one of the
Mm,
hardest things to transmit.
Mhm.
okay.
It's like you can assume what you want exactly. It's not what you're gonna get, right? So there's a really big part of trust in there. Like even though you don't get 100% what I mean, I trust you. I trust that what you do is going to be great, right? So I think that someone that really transmits that trust and that has that confidence in saying like I took this decision because of this, and they can justify it. I think that makes a great podcast editor. Because to be honest, I'm more right now in like my life. I'm more in the other side. I'm more in the client side, and that's something I appreciate a lot.
Yeah.
And someone also that combines, I mean, I guess in Latin America, someone that combines this part of audio plus content, which Steph, I think, said it greatly, is really scarce. So, like, people, we're looking for people like that in Latin America because they're
Mm.
only audio or they're only content, you know? And
Mhm.
if you can do both, I mean, that you really stand out.
Yeah, no, that's a great answer. And I think also, the underlying theme there is client expectations, right? Just setting
Mhm.
clear expectations with your client about like what they're communicating, what you're hearing, what the work you're doing is going to be, whether it's specific work or it's the tone, right? The tone of your show or the feeling of it. I think that's a really important aspect. Steph,
Yes.
can you speak a little bit about that?
Yeah, and also oh my gosh, what they say, what they think they need and what they actually need are often very different too. Like I used to give people what they specifically said and they'd be like not unhappy but not happy, and I shifted and was like, I'm going to experiment a little bit here and I'm going to do this cuz I feel like that might be better, or they might need this, so I'll send an extra email with some information that I think is something they might want. And then there was this moment where my clients started to get like excited about what was happening when I send them stuff, and I was like, there we go. So it's a little bit of mind reading or ear reading. I don't know. I feel like maybe the word, but there's
And can you just, when you do that, I just want to ask a follow-up question there. Are you communicating with them like, hey, this is what you asked for, but it sounded like maybe you wanted this? And then what are some of those gaps?
Yes, I am communicating with them, but not necessarily in a super technical way, because most of my clients are business folks that are very pressed for time and they want the end result more so than the process. So I'll tell them maybe like a tone thing that I went with, or like a tiny thing that like the emotion or the energy of the episode, but I won't necessarily tell them the technical specifics that got it there.
Okay.
That makes sense.
Yeah, and then what seems to be in your experience, what seems to be the gap in between what people ask for and what they want?
I think people like out editors are, I'm not sure that they're familiar with the nuances that could make their podcast better, and I think the editors are. And so I don't think they know to ask for these things. Do you know what I mean? Like they don't.
Yeah,
like
but
if
for everybody out there,
you've
what are
never
the
had
things? What are the things?
What are the things?
Yeah.
Oh, gentlemen, help.
It's just
Puneet, you want to jump in here?
help.
yeah. I like, in my experience, it's just the language. I mean, the editors would be speaking in a very technical language. Like, let's say a client is finding a particular audio recording too harsh, so the client will tell that, okay, make this sound go, right? That's their language. That's their way of explaining. But to an editor, it's like, okay, cut down 6-7K in your EQ. That's, I mean, that's what it's that barrier of language is what I feel the gap.
And like some of my clients used to say things like, well, there's not a lot to do. There's not a lot to take out. There's not, they think of what needs to go away. And it's not just what you're pulling out, it's what you're leaving in and what you might rearrange or what you might emphasize. And that's not something that I think they're used to thinking about.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah. What, I mean, I don't want to keep drilling the same question, but what are some of those specifics? I mean, can Feifei, David, you know, can either of you kind of speak to maybe what's maybe an example from a podcast that you might have encountered in, you know, what the client asked for versus what they actually wanted?
Okay. So I think the client doesn't even know what they want until they hear what you've done. You know, then they start to have an idea they want to go all of a sudden.
Okay.
But you know, from my experience, this includes both producing podcasts and listening to a lot of podcasts. An idea or an audio file and ask me to, you know, edit it and package it then I start to ask for things like, you don't have an intro, you don't have a PSA, what's your website, what music do you want, do you have an idea, is there a podcast you've listened to that you like, that you want, you know, because just like Puneet said, you know, they don't have those that an editor would instantly understand, but if they have a reference point from enough, give you that to listen to, then you can have a better idea what they're trying to say. So if I have 2 or 3 conversations with a client and we're still not getting anywhere, I'd ask for into about 5 different podcasts. Let me know what you like in each of them.
Mhm.
me a little bit of an idea where they want to go. So that's how, those are the I ask about to help me find, at least a way towards podcast.
Yeah. No,
That's a good idea.
that's a really great aspect. I think also, the way that you said, they don't know it. They know it when they hear it, but they can't necessarily explain it. So
Exactly.
yeah, I think it's definitely something that also, as an editor, when you're thinking about what are the benchmarks of a great editor, it's something where you know, it, it's almost that you can't quite put your finger on it, but it's that you can create what the client wants and
Mhm.
understand what their actual brief is, right? Or what they're hiring you for without them even explaining it, because they may not have the vocabulary. They may not be
Mhm.
equipped, right? It's like going to a restaurant. People don't know what the ingredients in a meal are, but they still want to order it, right?
Very true.
That's kind of what it sounds like, just hearing from all of you about this. It's like you go in and you want some really complicated dish, and the kitchen's like, okay, but like, what's in that? And it's like, well, the kitchen should kind of know. And I think maybe from, just the amalgamation of all your answers, in terms of the good benchmarks or a great benchmark of a great editor, is that you're able to kind of create that meal, based on, what the client is literally trying to order, right?
Yep.
And that's the thing, when people come to an
Yeah.
editor, they're not a chef, they don't own a restaurant, right? They're not an editor. They may not have the vocabulary, they may not even know what program you're using to edit, right? They don't know the
Mhm.
language or even have the language to communicate what their wants and needs are. So I think that's really an important aspect. And you all kind of spoke around it, but I think I'm getting my finger on this. Is that accurate?
Yeah,
Yeah, it is.
completely. I
Yeah.
mean, I
Yeah.
wanted to say that like at the end of the day, I think the meal, like based on your analogy, like the
Yeah.
meal you order as the
Mhm.
client, it's you're not really sure what you want, and at
Yeah.
the end you're not gonna get what you thought you wanted, but only after you taste it you can really like start to know, right? I
Mhm.
think.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. I
Yeah.
mean, I think it's also something where, editing is a very specialized skill. And in podcasting, everybody starts somewhere, and there's so many beginners out there that start, doing everything for their podcast, right? Let's say you're a single independent podcaster. You're
Mhm.
creating your social graphics, you're writing your show notes, you're publishing your podcast, you're scheduling your interviews, you're editing your audio, you're doing all of that yourself. And then when you speak to somebody that has a specialized skill, you may not know what you don't know. So I think that that's a really, really important aspect of it. And each of you kind of started out, creating a business and learning what rates to charge. And there seems to be also, we kind of spoke about this tipping point of like when to charge people, but when did you each feel like, your indie podcasting skills really started to hone in, or you were able to turn it into a professional business? Because it seems like all four of you have really been able to do that.
Mhm.
Um, Beneath, let's start with you on this one. I want to hear, kind of your take on that.
I really don't have a solid answer for this. Uh,
Okay.
I mean, I recently started my own production house, but
Mhm.
that had literally nothing to do with, you know, what level of skills I was in,
No, I
because
don't mean
I,
skills. I mean in terms of having the business of getting your editing clients and your business to that level.
I'm sorry, I don't understand the question.
Like to the level where we felt confident that this is what we do?
Right,
Is
exactly.
this an imposter syndrome question?
No, not necessarily, but it could
Okay,
be.
okay.
Oh, in
Ah.
that sense, I mean, after editing quite a lot, I mean, in hundreds of episodes,
Mhm.
and doing it much quicker than you used to when you started, you kind of get a
Yeah.
confidence by talking to more people, by understanding the work more and more. You kind of get a confidence that yes, this industry is is a place where I can grow. This industry is where I
Mhm.
can start a business in, and that confidence mixed with a bit of the will to work more to get more clients. I mean, it's all a mixture of that, which I think can get us to start a business.
Absolutely. Steph?
Yeah. Gosh. For me, it was like layers, and it's still growing because with each time I talk to and take on a new client, and they want something a little bit different after doing that new thing for a while, and then I talk to a new client, I realize how good I got at the last thing. And I'm like, "Oh," but it doesn't kick in until I'm talking to a new client. Like as I'm doing it and learning, I never feel like I'm really there until I'm describing it to somebody else, and then I go, "Oh wow, I didn't realize that I learned how to do that in this like very efficient, very emotional, like good audio way." And so it's just like every time I level up or take on a new client, I feel like I get more and more confident in what I'm doing, and that it's appreciated, and that feels really good because this is a very isolating task to be doing.
Yeah.
You're in a vacuum. We always
Yes.
talk about how podcasting is really a community-based medium. But a
Mhm.
lot of the time, people have that perception that it's you and the mic. And with editing, sometimes it is you and the audio, right? So
Mhm.
I think that's an important aspect. David, any insight from your side about, when you felt like you kind of had the skills, but then you moved into more of a professional business?
I mean, I guess I hope this doesn't sound like abusive, but since the moment I saw there was a business there, because I was like, okay, like there's an opportunity here. Because even when I didn't have the skills, there were so many people that wanted to do a podcast and they had
Mm.
no interest in knowing how the sausage is made. Like they were like, can you help me with this, like distributing my podcast? And I was like, you just need to go to a hosting site. I don't
That's
care,
us.
just
Yeah.
like
Come
help
to
me.
Podbean. We're here.
Yeah, yeah. Come to, yeah, I was like, go to Podbean, and they're like, I don't care, do it for me. I'm like, okay, I mean, okay, if you don't want to know, not even the basics, and just get like the end result, I'll send you the Spotify link. And I mean, it was, for me, it was great because I got paid a little to learn, and
Mhm.
they were paying me to learn, and they had no idea I was learning through that.
Yes.
And I think I mean, you should always charge, because even simple tasks take a lot of time, and
Yeah.
you said, I think it's a good method to charge first, and then learn and
Mhm.
practice and experiment and do a good job, of course, but like use it as a process.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Feifei, let's hear from you about this as well.
Okay, so for me, a business for me with the increase in volume of the number of episodes right? So initially you have one client, okay, I was coping, and then it started to increase from 1 to 3, and I realized that first of all my schedule was a mess, and I did all the time. I was working all the time and attend family functions because I would have gone, and gotten too much work than I could handle.
Right.
So
Okay.
I realized, okay, so I got an editor who I split the money with, and then we started that, and then before you know it, I have 2 editors, and
Mhm.
it's volume that made me get the realization that this was a business.
Oh, I love that. No, and I think each of your answers is so different. It really kind of offers a little bit of perspective because there's no, there's no cookie cutter road to podcasting as a business. There isn't.
Mhm.
And in terms of learning the skills, Feifei, I love what you said about just like I had the clients, they were there. David, you're like,
Mhm.
people didn't want to do the work. They didn't even. Podbean, you can start a podcast in 5 minutes from your phone, and
Mhm.
if people wanted to hire you to do that, great. I love what each of you said about that. I think it's really interesting. And I kind of want to I have a couple more questions. We have a little bit more time. But I think in terms of attracting clients, Feifei, you kind of really led directly into the next question here because people always want to know, like, oh, you have these skills, or for some people, maybe the word got out, and now everybody knows you're a podcast editor. But I think a lot of people do ask, how do you attract clients, right? Because like you were saying, there's budget websites that have, the minimum available that aren't maybe going to have the quality like an Upwork or, something where you just Fiverr or, you pay $5 and who knows what you're going to get. So what do each of you do to attract clients? Feifei, let's start with you.
I'm not very good with, things I do to people, because a lot of people say, oh, word of mouth is great, to tell people what you do. So the one way I know that I deliberately attract is by doing what I do to the greatest quality that I know. Produce a great podcast because I know that it will be recommended. Like someone would say, and they'll come look for me, and that's been my method. And people always say, "Oh, I'm not a big talker," So I just a podcast project in front of me. I think of the best way to execute it, or the best way to stand out as much as possible. So when someone hears it, they come looking for me.
I like that. No, that's such a great answer. I mean, I think also, letting your work stand for itself and making sure you do the best possible job on each project so that people, will find your work is such an important aspect. Steph, let's hear from you because I feel like you might have a different answer.
Oh, I'm ridiculous. I spend way too much time online. And I honestly, I was a teacher for language instructor for a long time. So I'm used to being around people, and I love audio, and I can be alone in my room and listen to audio and feel like I'm around people. But I still like humans and faces and all that kind of stuff. So I tend to be online in a ridiculous amount of places. I'm in a ton of groups. I'm answering questions on different Facebook groups, over on Twitter, Instagram, wherever people are, and I, grew, started GPE, and people started to, come on and talk to each other, and so. I'm visible in places. I'm loud and I'm visible, and I answer questions, and I yell at people when they get too techie and alienate others, and I'm just very in people's faces, I think, but hopefully not in a rude way. And so I think that attracts some attention, but also word of mouth for clients. I tend to get clients from word of mouth, or from them finding something I've written on a Facebook group and then following my profile over to my website. But yeah, everywhere is my answer. I put my stuff everywhere.
And I think that also kind of speaks to marketing your business as well. I think in terms of podcasting, there's a lot of different ways that independent podcasting businesses are marketing, whether it's community or whether it's paid ads or whether it's relationships or whether it's, maybe you're, approaching individual podcasters or you're responding to bids, that kind of thing as well. But I think there are some important aspects that you spoke to, and the word of mouth really. I think both of you mentioned this, Feifei and Steph, and I'm sure Puneeth and David, I'm sure you have a similar answer in terms of letting your work speak for itself. But I think that is so important because, as podcasting grows, and a lot of that content is evergreen, right? It's going to stay on those channels. You can remonetize it, which, at Podbean we do, but the content of the episodes is invaluable because you can just keep selling it and it keeps staying on your channel, and it's amazing. So I think as that work grows and more people listen, even if it's just one specific episode or a small number, people will find you in that way. So I think that's really important. And making sure you're in the right spaces, right? Stuff like you were saying with Facebook groups, community plays a big aspect in podcasting because, we're all growing as an industry. So it's definitely important. Yeah.
And also, I kept hearing people say, you're going to reach this point, like you're waiting for your clients, you're waiting to get clients, you're waiting to get clients, and then you have too many. And I was like, well, I don't want to have too many because I'm not here to work too much. I'm not going to outsource. I'm going to be boutique. I've got maximum of 5 clients, and I'm not going beyond that. I'm not working any more than that. So I
Yeah.
figured, well, I need to know other editors also. In addition to
Mhm.
wanting to talk to them, I also wanted to be able to refer people out because I don't do true crime. And when people come to me and say, "Can you edit my true crime podcast?" I need to be able to refer them out to somebody. So
Yeah.
community was a huge part of that for me.
Absolutely. Puneeth, let's hear from you about this one as well in terms of finding the right clients.
Mm. For me, LinkedIn has been the biggest help.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I think 95+% of my clients are I found on LinkedIn. And ever since I've started my production house, I mean, I'm learning how to market myself, which I didn't need to before. I mean, I used to just message potential clients and, hopefully, and hope that they answered. But ever since I've started my production house, I'm learning different techniques of how to market without spending any money.
Mhm.
And the best way I found and learned that is that, establish yourself as an expert in the field. And I'm trying to do that by posting consistently. And right now I'm just sticking to text post. I mean, like long form blogs, micro blogs, like what LinkedIn is. And I would say 50% I'm trying to establish myself and my company as an expert in the podcasting space, and 50% I'm still continuing messaging potential clients. I mean, if I already have a client, like let's say Hala, I just go to her followers list, and on LinkedIn you have first, second, third connections.
Yeah.
So just go to second connections, and if they are podcasters, and if they have a podcast which is very similar to the type of podcast that I edit, message them. Say that you edit Hala's show. I mean, I edit Hala's show, and I think I can edit your show in a better way too. I mean, that's how I go about it.
That's fantastic. I think that's really helpful input for anybody out there. There's a lot going on LinkedIn. And I think also, not being afraid to just say, hey, I'm here. You like this podcast. I edit this podcast. Here it is. I think also, that entrepreneurial aspect of it is really important. And it doesn't have to be, a hard sell. It can just say, hey,
Yeah.
here's what I do if you're
Yep.
interested. And I think that's a really important aspect as well.
And
David,
sorry,
yeah,
sorry to
sorry.
cut you out, but I just want to
No.
add one more point to what I just said. I mean, even I myself get a lot of just stupid messages on LinkedIn, where it's a template. It's literally. I mean,
Right,
sometimes
right.
I
Dear
actually
business
get
owner. Right.
no, even worse. I sometimes get "Hello, ma'am." That's what I get.
What?
Yeah, it's just a copy paste message.
Yeah.
Right. So when you're approaching someone, when you're approaching a potential client, try to
Mhm.
provide some value first. I mean, listen to that episode. Uh, you know, figure out some things or note down some things that you think you can improve in that episode, and just tell them that this aspect of your show can be improved, and I can help you do that. I mean, make it a bit personal rather than too businessy.
Yeah.
Oh, can I bounce
Yeah.
off of that? Also on LinkedIn, which is a really great resource, I found that actually sharing something that I've learned that day or that I realize I know that maybe not everybody does, like sharing that is way more impactful and helpful than just saying, I have these services, hire me, because
Yep.
it's like you're giving that value that Puneeth is talking about and not just saying me, 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 me. Like you're adding to the space and you're letting people know that you can do stuff at the same time. And that's really impactful.
Yeah. No, I love that aspect as well. Adding value is really important.
Mhm.
I think for everybody out there, clients want to know that you have value and can add value to their, whether
Mm.
it's through their podcast, or whatever it is whatever service that you're providing. But I think it's also something where, you know, in that spirit of generosity, people are going to be attracted to your
Mhm.
skill set as well. So I think that that's a really important aspect. David, let's hear your take on this in terms of attracting clients, because it sounds like in Latin America it's a bit of a boom, and there's a lot going on there.
Yeah, so I mean, I think I can rescue a lot of the things Stefan Puneth have said. I mean, I guess my main point has been to change my brand persona, I would say, to become the podcast guy. And that means I've like on Twitter, on Facebook, in real life, and it's not fake because I really am passionate about podcasting. But like when people are like, hey, recommend a podcast for me, or hey, I want to start a podcast, a lot of people come to me organically now, and I'm super happy to have those conversations. And they're usually not possible clients, because for example, right now for Genuina Media, our company, we only take on corporate clients, right? Because also we don't want to outsource, and we can only take certain amount of clients. And but still, like, the part of connecting with people that are interested in podcasting, and when like somebody is thinking like in our close circle about podcast, they look at us. It's super interesting and super fun. And we've started a blog too that has been really helpful. And like when people approach us, because anyone in Genuina, a lot of people approach us and they're like, hey, I want to start a podcast, what microphone should I buy? And we're like, no, wait, you don't need a microphone. What's your idea? Like, who do you want to reach? And we have articles like, for all the funnel of like start your podcast. And that
Yeah.
has also helped us, and people have us in mind. So when they have their company ready to start a podcast, they come to us. So that has been great.
Absolutely. I think that that's a fantastic aspect of it as well. And I think, well, I mean, we kind of touched on community stuff, I think, in terms of the role that community plays. But Feifei and David and Puneet, I'd love to hear from each of you if you have a take on, because it sounds like each of you, first of all, is building your community of clients. That really is prevalent. But I think in terms of overall community and podcasting, Puneet, you kind of touched on this in terms of LinkedIn, positioning yourself as an expert. How have you found that the role that community plays within podcasting positively impacts your business? Puneet, let's start with you because you had that great LinkedIn example as well.
Again, like continuing from what I said,
Yeah.
because of my connections on LinkedIn is how I found more and more clients. I mean, even if I haven't found more clients, some of my connections who are also podcast editors, they sometimes just message me like, "Hey Puneet, I'm a bit overloaded at this moment. Can you help me edit this episode, and I'll pay you blah blah blah." Right. So even if it is not exactly a client, you're still getting different kinds of work from your different kinds of connections. That's
Absolutely.
my answer. Yeah.
No, I think, and Steph, you also touched on that as well. As a podcasting business that is, minute for minute, you're not outsourcing, you're a one man show, one man band, one woman
Yes.
band. It's something where, having that network, because you know that when you maybe have a spot open, somebody will funnel work to you, that when
Exactly.
you have maybe somebody coming to you that you can't fit in or isn't the best fit, even like you said, with true crime as a genre, you're able to farm them out to you're able to, help other podcasters with their slate of shows that they're working on. Absolutely. David, do you have a take on community as well?
I think it's the most, it's like, since I've been in this business, I think it's the most amazing part of podcasts. I think people are super nice and super helpful. And in Latin America specifically, I think most of the people that are trying to make money out of their podcast are struggling. It's just a reality. It doesn't matter how many followers you have, how many listens you have. The market is so premature, I would say, that you're struggling. It's a real hustle. So I think community and helping each other, and everybody having the focus of let's grow podcasting in Spanish in Latin America, and let's just bring people in the medium, has been such a cool incentive to connect with people.
Absolutely. Feifei, do you have a take on community and how that's played for your business as well with 808 Extra and also with, Nija Pod Hub?
Yeah, I mean, approach to community was a bit different. I started my community because I wanted to help, understand how to go about making a podcast. But I mean, wow that my clients are in that community, you know, and it took you don't have to do everything yourself. There's people who are interested in just that you record, and if I don't have the your podcast, I could help you find someone who would do a great job as well. So yeah, definitely helps as well, because if that many people know that I am a podcast editor, if they ever get a podcast editor, they recommend me as well. So that's how community has helped business.
Absolutely. Well, it has been such a pleasure to chat with you all today. Steph and our collaboration for Global Podcast Editors. I'm going to read our brief outro. Thank you all so much for joining us today. I think, it's been really insightful for everybody out there who edits their own podcast or is maybe starting to edit podcasts for clients, or just, taking on some freelance work, about knowing when it is to make that shift in your business, the role community plays, what to charge, how to attract clients, the benchmarks of a great editor, right? And getting that meal right in terms of the recipe. And how you each got into podcasting, because it is such a unique journey for everybody. As podcasting as an industry evolves, we're all evolving with it. So it's really great to connect with you all here and hear about your different journeys and businesses, and how, podcast editing, even just that niche within podcasting, is expanding at such an exponential rate. So I'm going to read our brief outro, and then we will conclude today. Thank you, everyone, for joining us at Podbean and Podcasting Smarter for our October live panel event, How to Become a Podcast Editor, Using Your Indie Podcast Skills for Freelance, Remote Work, or to Create a Business, in collaboration with Stephanie Fuccio of Podcast Editing Plus, Global Podcast Editors, and Geopats, for this truly global conversation with special guests Fei from Nigeria, Puneet Shenoy from India, David Romer from Mexico, as they discuss the nuances of podcast editing, freelancing, and how they each went pro. So thank you all so much for joining us today. For those of you who may be joining us for the first time, Podcasting Smarter is brought to you by Podbean, and we have live stream sessions just like this one with top podcasters and experts. We also have exclusive recorded episodes on the Podcasting Smarter podcast. If you joined late or want to have another listen to this conversation, you can replay this live stream on Podbean's YouTube channel and on our podcast. Podcasting Smarter is brought to you by Podbean. We're a podcast hosting and monetizing platform and home to over 600,000 podcasts. To start your podcast, head over to podbean.com today. Thank you so much for joining us, and stay tuned for next month's live panel in November. Happy podcasting, everyone. Thank you.